Thank you all for coming tonight. I'll be back up after around dessert time, so I'm going to be really fast now because everybody came to hear Sal Khan. I have concluded that in the world of blended and online education, the only person that might be better known, at least by name, than Sal Khan is this person named Mook. I think it's George Mook. I haven't quite got his first name down. But after Mook comes Khan, and the Khan Academy, which got going a dozen years ago with Sal initially tutoring family members, is now a many millions of participants venture that is beginning to transform education in America in some very interesting ways. Part of this group got to see a video about this earlier today. Some of you didn't get that privilege, so you're going to hear what Sal does, what the Khan Academy does, what they're up to. I think this is well worth your while. I think the Stanford crowd should forgive Sal for the MIT and Harvard parts of his past. And I think you should join me in welcoming a very interesting guy. Please come up.
So I like to start any talk, really just to get a gauge of the audience. How many of y'all have used Khan Academy in some way? How many of y'all have children or grandchildren who use Khan Academy in some way? Okay. And how many of you have no idea what Khan Academy is? Okay, good, perfect. That's why we're here. So for those of y'all either who don't know much about it or even are somewhat familiar with it, you probably associate Khan Academy with a library of videos that I started making almost 10, well, the video was about 8 years ago. And that still is a big part of Khan Academy. But what I hope to talk about over the course of the next few minutes is we think that's just the beginning, that there's much more to Khan Academy than just videos. But to get everyone on the same page, I will show you a montage of what these videos actually look like.
We could integrate over the surface, and the notation usually is a capital sigma. All of these interactions are just due to the gravity over interstellar, or almost you could call it intergalactic. This animal's fossils are only found in this area of South America, a nice clean band here. Notice this is an aldehyde, and it's an alcohol. Is there 30 million plus the $20 million from the American manufacturer. They create the Committee of Public Safety, which sounds like a very nice committee.
This is not Eve.
No, Botticelli's portrayed the ancient goddess of love.
This is 6 times 6 times 6, or 216.
I'm told the humidity makes it feel hotter. Why is this?
Excellent question, LeBron.
Let's just make it 11.
Play with the pendulum and get a feel for how it moves.
Function as a bridge rectifier.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
If this does not blow your mind, then you have no emotion.
I could tell y'all would enjoy Euler's identity. So just to give a snapshot of where Khan Academy is right now, it's being used in some way in practically every country on the planet. There's 150,000 teachers who are using it in some way, shape, or form in their classrooms or outside of their classrooms. There's 10 million unique users who are using it every month. And they've done 1.5 billion problems. They're doing about 5 million questions a day on the site. And we'll talk a little bit about what it means to do a question and what that's all about on Khan Academy. But before going into all of that and what we're working on and maybe where we're going, I'll give a bit of the backstory of how all of this started. And for those of y'all who saw the 60 Minutes piece, it kind of gives you an overview of it. You rewind about 9 years ago, 2004, I was a year out of business school. I was an analyst at a very small hedge fund in Boston, and I had just gotten married, and I had family visiting me in Boston from New Orleans. New Orleans is where I was born and raised as well. And while they were there, it was my aunt, my uncle, and their 3 kids, and their oldest was Nadia, 12 years old. And it just came out of conversation one morning. Her mom, Nasrtanti, said, look, Nadia's been having trouble with math. She just took a placement exam. She's been tracked into a slower math class. Do you have any thoughts about that? And I was pretty concerned. My aunt hadn't gone through the kind of the American system. She didn't understand the repercussions that would have, that if she gets put into a slower math class in 7th grade, then it would kind of stay with her, and she probably wouldn't take calculus in high school, and it could even potentially limit her career options. So when Nadia came into the room, I said, look, you know what's going on? And she said, I just can't get unit conversion, kilometers to miles, ounces to gallons. And so I said, look, you know, I'm 100% confident you could understand that if you applied yourself. I think she was skeptical. So I said, well, how about when you go back to New Orleans, I work with you. We'll get on the phone after work for me, after school for you. We'll figure out if we could use the internet somehow to see each other's writing or to kind of share problems. And she agreed, so we started. And so that was August of 2004. And long story short, after about a month and a half, she got caught up, she got units, she even got a little bit ahead of the curve. And at that point, I became what I call a tiger cousin. And so I called her school, and I said, you know, I really think Nadia Reimagined should retake that placement exam from last year. They said, who are you? I said, I'm her cousin. And they actually did let her retake that placement exam, and then she got put into the advanced track. And you know, that was pretty exciting for me. It was, you know, a relatively small intervention that I did with my cousin, and it seemed to change her trajectory. So then I started to work with her younger brothers. And then, you know, over the next 2 years, by 2006, several things had happened. The first is the firm I was working for, and you know, I use that term very generously. It was myself, my boss, Dan Wohl, and his dog. And Dan's wife became a professor at Stanford Law School. And so we moved the firm out here, literally right over here to Sand Hill Road. And in that time, I had also started working, you know, while I was tutoring my cousins, I saw that they all had these gaps in their knowledge. Some needed more practice with basic adding fractions. Some needed practice with exponents. So I started writing this little exercise generator for them to give them practice problems. I wanted to keep track of what they were doing, so I put a database behind it. And that was the first Khan Academy. It had absolutely nothing to do with videos. And it was almost a bit of a joke. I was like, well, you know, I know my name is Sal Khan, and you know, the domain name's available, et cetera. And the other thing that happened over those 2 years is word got around in the family that free tutoring was going on. And so I found myself every day after work with about 10 or 15 cousins, family, friends, all over the country, kind of working through their pre-algebra, arithmetic, algebra, whatever it might be. And it was around that time, this was November 2006, I was at a dinner party right here in San Mateo. A friend's house is Zuli Ramzan. And all my friends knew that I had this kind of crazy project with my cousins. They knew I was working on this little software website thing. And I was showing this off after most of the guests had left. And then Zuli said, well, you know, this is really cool, Sal, but how are you actually scaling your lessons, your tutorials? And I said, you know, frankly, I'm not. It's much harder now to do it with 10 or 15 cousins than when I only had 2 or 3. And he said, well, you know, it's just an idea. Why don't you make some video tutorials and upload them on YouTube for your cousins? And I immediately said, no, that's a horrible idea. YouTube is for cats playing piano. It is not for serious mathematics. But I went home that weekend, and I got over the idea that it wasn't my idea. And I decided to give it a shot. And you know, I started, it was kind of pre-algebra concepts, adding fractions, some early algebra stuff. After I made about 20 or 30 of them, it didn't take too long. There were these short, you know, 5-10 minute videos. I started telling my cousins, hey, you know, before we get on the phone together, why don't you watch these things, and that way you can ask questions if you want to go deeper. And we did that for a few weeks, and then I asked my cousins, you know, what do you think of them? And they famously and somewhat backhandedly told me that they liked me better on YouTube than in person. And you know, at first that seems like a somewhat strange statement, that someone's saying, hey, you know, they want the kind of the virtual version as opposed to the real thing. But when you view it from their point of view, or really any learner's point of view, anytime any of us have learned something, it actually made a lot of sense. We've all had the experience of, you know, you ask a coworker or a colleague, hey, how does this work, or how do you do this? And they're well-intentioned, they try their best, but they go through it really fast and say, hey, it's just, you know, steps A, B, C, D, it's easy, right? And you say, yeah, sure, and you wish that you could, you know, and then you look it up on the web or whatever else. And so now that my cousins didn't have to do that. You know, I tried to be as patient as possible, but when you're learning something, you don't want to feel like someone else is judging you. Someone else is seeing how fast you get it. Now they could do it when they wanted to, however long they wanted to. They didn't have to be embarrassed if they're in algebra and they had some gaps in their basic arithmetic. And for me, I could kind of do it once and put it out there. The one thing that I think is clear when they were saying that they like me better on YouTube than in person is they weren't saying that they didn't appreciate me in their life. They weren't saying that they didn't appreciate the time on the phone. They were just saying that the first time that you're really trying to get your head around a problem, it's nice to kind of doing it at your own time and your own pace. So I took that as positive feedback, kept making more and more and more videos, and just uploading them on YouTube. And before long, it started to become clear that people who are not my cousins were watching. And and they started to write some comments, and some of the comments were just a simple thank you. And even that was pretty neat. I don't know how much time you spend on YouTube. Most of the comments are not thank you. They are something a little bit more racy. But then the comments got more intense. This is the reason why I got an A in algebra. This is the reason why I was able to pass trigonometry. This is the reason why I didn't drop out of high school. This was the reason why after leaving the military, I was able to re-engage and go back to college. I remember in those early days, there was this one letter that I literally brought my wife over to read it with me. This mother said that both of her sons had a learning disability, that this was the only thing that was getting through to them, and that because of that, her and her entire family prayed for my entire family every night. And this is pretty heady stuff, and just to put things in perspective, I was an analyst at a hedge fund. I wasn't used to people praying for me. It was a very, very, at least in that way. The site traffic just kept growing and growing and growing, and it was taking more and more of my time. And then, frankly, by 2009, I was having trouble focusing on anything else. I set it up as a not-for-profit, and I sat down with my wife. We had a little bit of savings. We hadn't bought a house out here. It was kind of our down payment. Anyone who knows the housing market out here, that's kind of a big thing. And but we said, look, it feels like the social return on investment here is really through the roof. It seems like hopefully we can find someone who can fund this. And so my wife agreed that maybe we'll give it a year. And so I quit my day job and I tried to do Khan Academy full time. And I think any entrepreneurial story, whether it's for-profit or not-for-profit, you almost start off a little bit naive. You assume things are going to happen fast, and then you do it, and they don't. The first 8-9 months, I had a little PayPal link. People were giving $5, $10. That was great. If it was any of you, thank you. But we were digging into our savings. My son had just been born. The down payment was quickly becoming less than what was necessary to be a down payment. And right around, so this is about 9 months later, all of a sudden, and I literally was thinking about updating my resume, all of a sudden a $10,000 donation comes in. So I immediately look at who this is. It came on through an email, and her name was Ann Doer. And I then see where she's located. It was in Palo Alto. I was like, oh, she's local. I immediately sent her an email. I said, thank you so much for your very generous donation. This was the largest donation that Khan Academy has ever received. If we were a physical school, you would now have a building named after you, which I think is pretty inexpensive by Stanford standards. I don't know. But she immediately wrote back, and she said, well, I use the site with my daughter. I use it myself. I'd love to learn more about what you're doing. And so we literally, I think it was a few days later, we met at an Indian buffet, literally on University Ave, right over here. And over lunch, Ann asked, well, what's your goal here? And I said, look, when I filled out the paperwork with the IRS, there's a little, mission, colon, and a line and a half to get the 501c3 status. And I filled out a free world-class education for anyone, anywhere. And so Ann said, well, that's ambitious. How do you see yourself doing that? And I told her, I was like, it's a mission. I don't think I'm just going to be able to accomplish it next year and then move on to healthcare or something. But but I think we can make a lot of progress towards it. I showed her the videos, I showed her the testimonials, but I said I think this is just a small part of it. I showed her the software. We could create interactive exercises. We could create dashboards for teachers. We could ways for students to connect online. And so Anne said, you're actually making a lot of progress, somewhat surprisingly, but how are you supporting yourself? And in as proud of a way as possible, I said, I'm not. And we kind of parted ways right after that, and I went home, a place in Mountain View, and right when I was getting into the driveway, I get a text message from Anne. It says, you really need to be supporting yourself. I've just wired you $100,000. So that was a good day. And frankly, that was, just the first in a series, a cascade of events that just got more and more surreal. A month later, I was, me and a friend, Aragon Burlingham, we were running this little summer camp in Portola Valley. And it was really just to experiment. I was this virtual teaching guy, and the theory was, well, look, if the lecture, if the information delivery, and even a lot of the practice can happen online, what can you do with a physical classroom? This was never about trying to replace the physical classroom. It was always about, let's try to make the physical classroom more engaging, more human. And so we were doing a summer camp that was very kind of exploration, game-based, project-based learning. And I had a group of middle school students at that moment. 6 were playing a game of Risk. And then the other 20 were trading securities based on the outcome of the game of Risk. Very good game. And while that was happening, I start getting text messages from Anne, which you can imagine I now take very seriously. And they were disjointed. It was hard to tell what order they were coming in. But it read along the lines of, I'm at the Aspen Ideas Festival in the main pavilion. Bill Gates is on stage with Walter Isaacson. Last 5 minutes talking about Khan Academy. And so I didn't really know what to make of this, so I immediately boot the nearest 7th grader off of a computer, and I start looking for some evidence of this thing that Anne is referring to. And it took about 20 minutes, and I eventually did find the kind of the video of literally Walter Isaacson asking Bill Gates, so what are you excited about these days? And Bill Gates just randomly starts, well, there's this site called Khan Academy. I use it with my kids. I use it myself. And he went on and on about it. And you could imagine what was going on in my head. It was exciting. This was surreal. It actually made me a little nervous. Those videos were for Nadia, not Bill Gates. And then, frankly, I went home. I obviously told my wife. I told everyone I knew. But then it was a question of what do I do next? What's the protocol here? Do I call him? I'm assuming he's not listed. And they left me in that kind of limbo state for the next 2 weeks. 2 weeks later, I'm in literally, the headquarters of Khan Academy was my walk-in closet in Mountain View. And I was about to record a video. A cell phone rings. It's a Seattle number. Hello? This is Larry Cohen. I'm Bill Gates' chief of staff. You might have heard that Bill's a fan. Yeah, I heard that. If you're free in the next few weeks, we'd love to fly you up to Seattle, learn more about what you're doing, figure out if there's ways that we might be able to support you. And I was looking at my calendar for the month at the moment, completely blank. So I said, yeah, maybe next Wednesday. I've got to cut my nails, but I think I could meet Bill Gates. But anyway, I had that meeting, very similar kind of questions that Anne asked, and I kind of said the same thing. At around the exact same time, and this was all just hitting at once, folks from Google reached out, same types of questions. What do you hope to do? What's the potential here? Gave them the same answers. And you fast forward to the fall of 2010, the Gates Foundation and Google were the first major supporters to essentially allow Khan Academy to become a real organization, get office space, start hiring a team, hire engineers, build out a real site. And what we really invested in then and what we continue to invest heavily is really the interactive part of Khan Academy. And this right over here is a picture of our knowledge map, and I'll show you a few slides in the future. It's changing dramatically, but I like to show this one because it gives an overview of how we think about learning, especially learning things like mathematics. You saw in the videos go much broader than just math, but the interactive part right now is still primarily K through calculus and soon calculus and beyond math. And each circle you see there, it's like a video game. The top circles are basic arithmetic, addition and subtraction. And as you go further and further down that map, you're getting to more and more advanced topics. And right now, if you were to go to the site tonight, you'd see topics in calculus and very advanced high school trigonometry, whatever you want. And the idea is the students, as soon as they show the system that they've mastered, say, basic addition, it'll then move them on to a more advanced subject. And on a lot of levels, this is common sense. This is how a video game would work. You beat level 1, then you move to level 2. This is how, if you're in a martial art, it would work. You take the white belt exam, and then you become a yellow belt. But what we point out is that this is not the way that traditional education works. Traditional education, the schools that most of us grew up in, they batch students together by age. They go to a classroom. The classroom tends to be lecture-based. Lecture, then the students go do homework, lecture, do homework. They do that for a week, 2 weeks. And then there's an exam. And let's say this exam is, let's say the unit is basic exponents. And on that exam, maybe I get an 80%, you get a 75%, you get a 90%, you get a 95%. And then even though we identified those weaknesses, even an A student who got the 95% didn't know 5% of even what the exam was sampling. Even though you identify them, much less the student who got the 70% or the 60%, the class moves on to the next topic. Probably something that's going to build on basic exponents, like fractional exponents, negative exponents, logarithms, who knows what. And to realize how strange on some level that is, imagine if we did other things in our life that way. Say home building. So you bring the contractor in, and you say, look, we've been told that we have exactly 3 weeks to build the foundation. Do what you can. So the contractor comes in, maybe it rains, maybe some of the workers fall sick, maybe some of the supplies don't show up on time. 3 weeks later, inspector comes. Inspector says, well, yeah, the concrete's still a little wet right over there. That part's not quite up to code. I'll give it an 80%. And you say, oh, great, that's a C. Let's build the first floor. You build the first floor, same thing, 2 weeks, do what you can, say it's a 75%, second floor, third floor. And then all of a sudden, when the fourth floor, while you're working on it, the whole thing collapses. And the reaction that we often have is, well, maybe we needed more inspection, or our inspection wasn't good enough, or maybe it was a bad contractor. And who knows, that might have been part of the ingredient, but the real obvious thing was that the process was strange. You were artificially constraining how long and when the contractor, in the case of education, the student had to work on something, or the teacher got to work on something with the students. Then you do an assessment. The assessment identifies weaknesses, identifies gaps, and then you completely ignore them, and then you build on top of those weaknesses. And so what we say is, look, instead of holding fixed when and how long a student has to learn something, and the variable is how well they learned it, A, B, C, D, and F, it should be the other way around. Every student should get to the A, should get to 100% of the basic exponents, and then the variable is how long they have to learn it and when they actually cover it. What we've launched recently, and this is kind of putting, really making the interactive part of Khan Academy the focal point of what we're doing. So if any of y'all go to Khan Academy, or children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews were to go to Khan Academy, one of the first things that they're going to see is actually now to take a pre-test. So the pretest is going to be 5, 8 questions. It's going to adapt to them. They can say if they haven't learned something. And it's going to build a model of what the student knows and doesn't know, or what it thinks it knows and doesn't know based on how they answer those questions. After that, it'll fill those tiles on the top. And those tiles, each of those squares are really one of those concepts that you saw on the knowledge map. And the depth of the blue is how well the system at that moment, just with a few questions, is the system thinks the student understands that. And then it'll start to recommend exercises that will be right in hopefully the student's sweet spot. And then the more that they do work, the more it'll try to adjust to what they're doing. So they're really trying to use some frankly, state-of-the-art machine learning to really personalize things for each student as well as possible. Everything we're doing right now is a Common Core aligned. I know that there's some debate and all of that. But one thing that I'll say, I was skeptical about the Common Core. I was actually skeptical of a lot of standards because I was, it depends on how it's implemented, et cetera, et cetera. But the more that I've kind of had a chance to engage with the folks who have been kind of authoring the Common Core and understanding how they want to see it implemented, because the implementation is really what matters. It's good. It's if anything, the only negative for it is that it's far more rigorous than the standards we've had before. What used to be taught in 9th grade algebra is now taught in 7th and 8th grade. What used to be in pre-calculus is now in Algebra 1 and Algebra 2. So it's actually a much more rigorous standard. These are just a sample of some of the people who are helping us write some of this content. We're really, we've talked a lot about the videos, or people know a lot about the videos, but what we're really trying to do is create, on top of the videos, a bank of the best possible questions and items that we can share with everyone, and then on top of that have this personalized learning engine so that students are doing the right thing for them, for each student at the right time. These are just some examples of what the exercises look like. I like to show these because it shows that you can do things in this form factor that you can't do in a traditional textbook or in a traditional chalkboard in a traditional classroom. Really allows students to understand things at a much deeper level and visualize things. So one exciting thing, this will probably be of interest to several of y'all, is the number one goal of Khan Academy is obviously to give access to people, to personalize their learning, for them to really be able to build a strong foundation and go as far as they want to go. But it probably hasn't passed your attention that, gee, if we have 1.5 billion questions answered, 5 million questions answered every day, 10 million students coming to the site every month, we get a lot of really interesting data. And so one of our hopes is also that Khan Academy over the next many years really becomes an important tool for researchers and cognitive scientists and whoever else to understand how we can optimize learning. And we want that to happen, obviously to forward science, but also to improve Khan Academy. And this is just one example where at any given point we're running about 20 experiments, 30, actually sometimes more, where we're taking 5% of our user base and we're giving them a slightly different experience. And we're saying, how does that affect engagement? How does that affect retention? How does that affect time on the site? And this is one that we actually tried out to really validate work by Carol Dweck here at Stanford. How many of y'all are familiar with growth mindset type of? Okay, a few of y'all. So it's actually a really interesting thing just in life. It's this general idea that we tend to praise people on innate ability. Oh, you're really smart, you're really good at that. But her work is, well, that's nice, but when people are always praised on their intellect, they might want to disengage or not try something where they're not feeling smart. And that it's much better to praise people on their perseverance or their effort because that's something that they can always apply. And so we tried doing that. While students are doing questions, we just randomly started for kind of the variable group. We started putting these growth mindset quotes. And we saw just that alone, these simple interventions, increase the number of problems done by 4%. And in the Q&A, we can talk more about other really interesting things that we're learning from this. This is an example of a dashboard that could be used in a classroom. And right when we started in the fall of 2010, we were, I had dreamt that Khan Academy might one day be used in a classroom, blended learning, whatever it might be. But I didn't seriously think it would be. I viewed it still as a supplementary thing for learners to improve themselves. But right when we were getting office space, folks at Los Altos reached out to us, and the superintendent is actually here with us tonight, and said, well, how would you imagine using these tools in context of a classroom? And we said, well, the classroom doesn't have to be about lecture anymore. It doesn't have to be about moving everyone together. Every student can go at their own pace. We can give the teachers dashboards, and so the teacher can see. And each row there is a student in the class. Each column is one of those concepts that you saw on the knowledge map. And the teacher can see where every student is. And if one student is having trouble, say that student who's been marked in red, the system will automatically flag that. The teacher could say, oh, Maureen's having trouble. I could go sit next to Maureen and work with her individually. Or I could get one of those other students. Marcia has already mastered this concept. Maybe she can tutor her peer. And so we started that pilot that first year in Los Altos, and we started kind of co-developing a lot of the dashboards and a lot of the early ideas about how Khan Academy could be used in a classroom in that early Los Altos pilot. This right over here is one of the most fascinating use cases of Khan Academy. I stress Peter McIntosh at Oakland Unity because we never want to think that this is something that you can just drop ship into a classroom and all of a sudden the butterflies fly, and it's something where paired with an amazing teacher, amazing things can happen. And Peter McIntosh is actually here with us. He's at the dinner tonight, and we want to point out this was a school that was doing well. It's a charter school in Oakland. They're taking kids from the Oakland public school system. Many of these students several years behind grade level, and they saw a dramatic improvement even before Khan Academy. They went from the 20th percentile to the 76th percentile. But what's been exciting is that they are now, and actually these numbers are old. I just talked to Peter right before a few minutes ago, and he said that they're actually now in the 99th percentile. And they're actually, so over the course of a few years, they went from the 20th percentile in the state of California for a 9th grade algebra class, to now they're at the point that there was only, I think it was 11 or 12 9th grade algebra classes in the state that had performed better than them. And so it's and Peter's here with us tonight, and maybe in the Q&A we might have a chance to collaborate on some questions. The next two videos I want to show you, I've talked a lot about schools, and that's where a lot of the excitement is around. But at Khan Academy, we always want to remind ourselves that still the bulk of our users, about 90%, are just random people out there trying to tap into their potential. And these next two videos are some of the best examples we've seen of that.
My name is Mark Halberstadt. Growing up, I was really always a C student. I pretty much thought that the only thing I was good enough to do in college was major in music. But I sort of almost felt that it was more I was getting it because I was terrible at everything else. Really what I wanted to do was electrical engineering. And the last thing that I remember completely not getting was trig identities. So I went to YouTube and I did a search for trig identities, and the Khan Academy was the first thing that popped up. Watched a bunch of videos in the trig playlist to kind of get caught up to speed. I watched all the videos in the calculus playlist. I watched all the videos in the physics playlist. Watched a lot of videos on arithmetic. I took a leap and I decided to go back to school and went to Temple University, majored in electrical engineering, getting a second bachelor's. And keep in mind, I was really a straight C student growing up. And I just finished this year, first year back in college. I got a 4.0 GPA for the entire year. I got perfect scores on both of my calc final exams and also on my chemistry final exam. I ended calculus, chemistry, both calculus classes, Calc 1 and 2, and chemistry with an average higher than 100%. There are some Khan Academy videos that I probably listened to the same concept over 20 or 30 times. And there is no tutor in the world I could have paid to have sat next to me and repeated the same thing over 20 or 30 times without at least them getting a little bit judgmental, or at least them thinking like, oh, well, this guy really is never going to get this concept and he should just give up. Where the understanding really happened was watching those videos and also working through the Khan Academy software and everything. The impact for me in my life, I really see it growing exponentially over the next 20 or 30 years. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you.
And we've been keeping track of him. Still has a 4.0 GPA. He's a junior now, so it's still good. And this is one we got very recently, a few months ago.
So I actually dropped out of high school twice, both during my freshman year. And when I eventually came back, I was put in sort of lower level math and science classes because I was so behind. Then I discovered Khan Academy, and I was able to skip 2 years worth of math just through using the site. And I came into school, I took the exam with students who had been enrolled in the class all year, and I was actually able to get the highest or the second highest scores in the class. So for me, Khan Academy really changed the trajectory of my entire life, because without it, I don't think I ever really would have been inspired to learn and to love math and to love science. I ended up graduating as a valedictorian and going on to Princeton, where I'm now a computer science major, and I'm absolutely passionate about learning, about computers, about math, about science. And without Khan Academy, I don't think that these things would really matter to me the way that they do today. So I'd just like to say a massive thank you to everyone at Khan Academy, Saul and the team. Please keep doing the good work that you're doing because you're really changing lives.
So when we found out he's a computer science major, we said, well, we have internships. So he interviewed, and he was actually probably one of the strongest intern interview. I mean, he just an absolute rock star. Every person he interviewed with, strong hire, strong hire, strong hire. And so I was like, wow, this is incredible. I was like, why are you surprised? We educated him. And so actually now and he's got like 1 million job offers for the summer, so we're trying to make the sell on him. But we're like, you owe us. But anyway, it was a great. Anyway, so the one thing that's probably been crossing your mind, this is great for Mark Halberstadt or Charlie or Oakland or Los Altos, but what about the rest of the world where frankly they might have little to nothing, and all of these are examples. These are all pictures taken from other groups, mainly not-for-profit NGOs, taking Khan Academy offline, online, bringing it out into villages, setting up computer labs, whatever else. And all of these are pretty incredible stories, exciting stories. But the most exciting one is probably the one on the top right. Several years ago, I used to give talks like this, as who knows, maybe one day it'll be used in Mongolia. And then a few months after that, I got an email from Mongolia. And it's the young girl on the top right, her name's Zaya. She was 15 at the time, and she sent an email with a link, a little YouTube link. I looked at the YouTube link. It was very similar to Charlie or Mark Halberstadt, how she enjoyed Khan Academy, et cetera, et cetera. That's great. I assume she must be middle class, upper middle class, if she had access to the internet, a computer, spoke English quite well. Then I read the email closer, and it turned out that there were a group of engineers from Cisco Systems that were taking their vacation time to go to Mongolia and other parts of Asia and set up computer labs with internet in orphanages. And what you see in the top right there, those are literally the orphan girls in Mongolia using Khan Academy, and Zaya was one of them and is one of them. And that by itself was kind of surreal and exciting for the entire team. But what's been even more incredible since then is that Zaya has now become one of our top contributors of content in the Mongolian language as a 17-year-old orphan. So it kind of just opens your mind of, once again, how much potential there is if you let folks tap into it. And to get an idea of the direction we're going to in terms of internationalization, I'll show you this next montage.
Sí decimos que bueno, esta fue la primera cara y esta fue la segunda cara.
तो ये जो है जो ऑब्जर्वर यहाँ कहीं बैठा होगा तो उसको ये इमेज जो है
那个角就是正弦数值对应的角。Мы можем обе стороны разделить на b plus a.
Également sur la dernière leçon. שהנקודה בשאלה. אז למעשה זה רק השינוי בערך y.
و سنگریزه رو ما اگه بدیم به نونوایی چیزی
এখন 2 কার্বন যুক্ত অ্যাসিটাইল CoA উৎপন্ন হয়
auf der Zahlengerade zeichnen. Hier ist meine Zahlengerade.
Mas é claro que ele fez muitas e muitas e muitas outras coisas importantes.
I'm Zaya from Mongolia. Your videos are so interesting and funny. Make more lessons.
And just to give a sense, those were the sample of the videos as they're translated. We're not just internationalizing the videos, we're trying to internationalize the entire experience, the exercises, the teacher dashboards, et cetera. We have great partners in Mexico, in Brazil, and in Turkey, and in France, and we're trying to find more throughout the world. We launched Spanish es.khanacademy.org a few months ago, so the entire experience, and this obviously is also relevant to the US, is available now in Spanish as well. So the original tagline was just the necessities. It's gotta. But this is something I tell to the team at Khan Academy all the time. I tell it to our supporters. I tell it to our volunteers. And I want to emphasize it's way more than just me now. We have a team of about 55 folks. Formally working for Khan Academy. We have, frankly, thousands of volunteers who've been helping us subtitle things, who are on the ground working with teachers, who are, we have many, many more supporters, big and small, after our initial ones that we talked about. And what I tell all of them is, I genuinely believe that we're at a special moment in history, that this isn't a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, that this is literally maybe a once-in-a-millennium opportunity, where we're clearly at this inflection point in history. And usually inflection points. They introduce opportunity, and they also introduce problems. And they also introduce usually new institutions to address those problems. The European colonization of North America, you have your Eastern Ivy League schools, the Industrial Revolution, you have MIT, Stanford, you have your state college system. And we're at least at big of an inflection point as any of those times in history. And the hope is that, well, maybe, just maybe, and it was delusional and it was literally just me operating out of a closet, maybe Khan Academy could be one of those institutions for this next kind of stage we're at. And the thought experiment I always like to do is, if you were to go 400 years back to Western Europe, and even 400 years ago, Western Europe was still one of the more educated parts of the planet, you would have seen about 15 to 20% of men could read, and about 10% of women could read. And I suspect that if you were to ask someone who could read back then, say a member of the clergy, and you say, well, what percentage of people that you think are even intellectually capable of reading, they probably would have said maybe 30%, maybe 40% with a good education. And we now know that's not true. It's 99.99% are intellectually capable of reading. And so what I like to think about, well, what blinders do we have on right now? Right now, if I were to ask any of you, what percentage of people could understand quantum physics? You'd say, oh, maybe 5%. What percentage of people really understand calculus? Maybe 5, 10%. Genetics, economics, whatever it might be, law. And so what I always challenge the team is, well, imagine a world, and it's not going to happen overnight, but maybe over the next 10, 20, 50 years, where all of those assumptions are proven to be wildly pessimistic, where we could increase the number of people who understand quantum physics or genetics by a factor of 10, by a factor of 100, and then just think about what might happen for all of us. I think it'll be a very exciting time to be alive. Thank you. Yeah, I can do. So I'd love to take any questions. Yeah.
That's a fascinating story, and I'm most impressed. My question has to do with the unions, and how do you react with the teachers' unions, who have been pretty strong?
Yeah, it's interesting because we haven't. All of the use in classrooms has been teachers on their own deciding that they wanted to use this. And teachers on their own deciding, hey, I found this helpful for my students, I found this helpful for me as a teacher. So, I suspect that that's very hard to kind of disagree with as a union, to say, oh, well, no, they shouldn't do that. My general sense is that they kind of view us a little askance right now, a little skeptical. A lot of our supporters are also the supporters who are, kind of more traditionally associated with school reform and who they might have been at, sometimes more at loggerheads with. But yeah, I think the simple answer is right now we haven't kind of, there hasn't been kind of there hasn't been tension or we haven't kind of come up against each other, because it is very bottoms up. We're not forcing anyone, and we don't want to force anyone to use this. And it might not be the right thing for every teacher and for every classroom.
Thank you. So I'm a teacher, and I taught 5th grade last year, and we used Khan Academy in my classroom. My students loved it, and it was funny. We were doing a lesson on decimals, and I think it was a Wednesday. And the kids were just riveted to the screen on the projector in the front of the room. And I was saying to myself, gosh, I just taught that same lesson yesterday on Tuesday, and they didn't get it, but they got it from you, so thank you.
Oh, no. I didn't plant her there. This is a completely random...
I also want to say that my colleague is a native Spanish speaker from Colombia, and he teaches 5th grade, and he's great at teaching math. And this year at my school, I teach in public school in San Jose, and we have a lot of native Spanish speakers who are really struggling with the textbook in English, because it's not written in a way that they can grasp. So my colleague is teaching an academy in the morning. Usually we do homework academies in the afternoon, but he's doing a morning academy, and guess what he's calling it? A Khan Academy Academy. So he's taking 4th, 5th, and 6th graders whose native language is Spanish, and just having them start with your Pre-tests.
And they're using the Spanish version of the site?
No, I don't think so. I
Oh,
think
okay,
he
well-
wants to, but he'll. Well,
Oh, he
I don't
wants to
know.
get them.
I'll ask him.
Yeah.
So
Well, it's interesting.
We'll have to get
I visited a classroom in Peru, and this was before we launched the Spanish version of the site. And you know, the people who run the school, they run a network of schools. It was actually, when they did the piece on IDEO in 60 Minutes, it was designed by IDEO in Peru. And I was getting there, I was like, well, do most of your students speak English? And they're like, no. And they're like, well, how are they using our site? We haven't really done, well, just watch. And we went, and the classroom, it was amazing. You know, these were literally, as you approached the school, it felt like it felt like a very poor neighborhood. But then as the school was beautiful, it's kind of, when we went in the room, I was like, well, how are they doing it? And these students, they figured out on their own, they would literally just copy and paste into Google Translate. And then they do the problem and then go back. And they're like, yeah, they figured that on their own, and we thought that was pretty good. So we just let them, but yeah, it's amazing what the students will do. Well, that's wonderful to hear. Oh, thank you. No, thank you. Giselle, I know Giselle, so I kind of did plant her there.
So my foundation, the foundation I work for, the Jacqueline Newman Foundation, is totally immersed in blended learning. And I consider you the poster boy for that. And I thank you very much for all the work you're doing to put us this fantastic way of learning on the map. And I'm going to put you on the spot. I think it would be very, very useful if you would put on your website, on your homepage, a link to your description of mastery-based learning in your book, because I think it's the best, easiest to understand description, and I think it's something that everybody should read. And if the 10 million people a month who get on your site, if some of them who are involved in policy were to read that, I think it would move everything forward much faster. Any plans for doing that?
Yeah, that wasn't too hard of a question. That was pretty. No, I mean, you know, we'll think. I mean, obviously, you know, the book is there to kind of give more depth to the ideas that, frankly, you know, I just talked about. But yeah, anything we can do to get more awareness we're all for that. That'd be great. Questions? We have a question over here in the back.
Hi, so I know that the Khan Academy lends itself really well to the science and math, and the challenge for a lot of students is writing. And I know that's it's been a challenge for you. Has there been progress, and have you come up with some new tutorials for that?
Yeah, no, writing is fascinating. We haven't done really much of anything yet. We've had ideas about how writing could be addressed. And it's interesting because you know, our best template for what might work is what we've done in computer science. In computer science on Khan Academy, it isn't videos and just, you know, quizzes and even adaptive quizzes. It's much more, there's tutorials and you work through these challenges, but then you create your own things, and your own little programs or screensavers or games, and then you can put them in your portfolio, on your profile, and you could share it with people, and people will give you feedback on it. And writing is a very similar thing. You don't want it to just write it and then one person grades it and it gets lost. You want to write, people give you feedback, and have continuous improvement on it so that you only get better and better and better. So we kind of dream about doing something like that in the not too far off future. You know, right now we're 90% of the organization's heads down, you know, just making sure we fully comprehensively cover Common Core K through 12, and then also calculus. We're actually working with Phillips Andover, that's where the AP test started, at Phillips Andover. We're working with their math department to make sure that our calculus items are of the same level of rigor. I mean, we're serious about the world class, not just the free, the world class. That's the same rigor that they teach calculus. And they, you know, most schools you go, even a good school, you have 20 or 30 kids take the AP test, maybe 5 or 10 will get a 5 on it. They have 135 kids take the AP test. They had 135 5s. So they're just a really rock star math department there. So you know, that's what we're heads down focused on right now. Then we're going to move into the kind of the tangential sciences, physics, chemistry. We already have videos, but on the interactive platform. But in parallel, we have one of our best people already starting to think about peer feedback, and both in computer science and maybe in things like in writing. Yeah. I'm making it intentionally difficult for the microphone. That's I want to make sure they earn their dinner.
So I'm just curious, because there's been a lot of movement in for-profit education probably over the last 20 years, and it sounds like it was a fairly quick decision to be a not-for-profit, and I'm just curious if you could, I don't know, explain that a little bit more. Because there's certainly people that are still continuing to struggle to monetize.
Yes.
And you clearly decided early on to be.
Yeah, it's once again, I think to a lot of people, including a lot of my friends, and even sometimes to me, it was a counterintuitive decision. I was in the middle of Silicon Valley. Half my friends are entrepreneurs and venture capitalists. I worked for a very for-profit company, but as part of my job as an analyst at a hedge fund, I talked to a lot of companies. I mean, that's all I did. I would talk to 5 or 6 management teams every day, and I'd try to understand their capital structure. I'd understand their motivations. I'd try to understand the pressures on them. And, your capital structure will drive you. A sole proprietorship can be very pure, but even then, once a generation passes, who knows what happens to it, if it gets acquired or whatever else. And I always, for me, the kind of the epic dream, once again, it was pretty delusional, even now, but especially when it started, was when I'm 80 years old, wouldn't it be great if billions of people have access to this, and they will in another 200 years, that there's nothing that's going to really steer it away from its mission. And the only examples I could find of organizations that could kind of stay true to their mission over that extended periods of time were not-for-profit institutions like Stanford and others. And so that was kind of the dream there. Since then, it's been revisited multiple times. There's actually a Harvard Business School case on should Khan Academy be a not-for-profit, and it's fun to see business school students debate that. But I think it's, at least for us, I don't think there's a right or wrong decision here, but I think for us, it's been the right decision. It's allowed us to, it's allowed us to stay very lean and small. We've actually been able to, I was actually worried about will we be able to attract the best talent. We've actually been able to attract, I'd argue the best talent in the Valley, and also get other people to really want to work with us. So, so far so good. One more question, so this has got to be a good one. This is good, we have some brave people. I think you over there were the first up, your hand was up first.
One of the things I find most interesting about Khan Academy is all of the data that can come back from it. My question is about the teacher dashboards that I saw. How exactly did those evolve, and where would you like to see them go in terms of the data that could come back to the teacher and what teachers could do with that?
Yeah, the first teacher dashboards were literally things that I had made for me as my cousin's tutor. I would say, what problems did they do? How long did it take them? Et cetera, et cetera. Then there was a couple of, the summer camp that I had run, we made a few more. And then actually there was a few other in the Bay Area that were using them. But then Los Altos was kind of the first real implementation where it's like, no, these are real students, real teachers for the real math class. That was, what we were just hiring up our design team, our engineering team, and they literally went to classrooms, talked to teachers, tried to understand their needs, started making those dashboards. And so to this day, we still, with some of our closest schools, our team goes there, tries to understand what they need, try to understand what everyone else needs, and just continue making these dashboards. My hope over the next 5 years, 10 years, or whatever, is that these dashboards are going to be able to, if I look at it, I could look at it, how are all of my students doing in aggregate? I could look at, and this is actually something we're hoping to have really in the next few months, that, especially with the Common Core standards, say I'm teaching a 6th grade math class, I could look at that dashboard and it'll give me kind of an ETA. It'll say, look, we think that these 6 kids are fine. They're gonna be able to complete the 6th grade mission by the end of the year. These kids, there's a smaller problem. These kids you need to work on, because these kids are not on track to finish or catch up. So a very good way for the teacher to be able to intervene, and when he or she wants to intervene, giving as much data as possible, showing the work the students did, suggestions of what might be the problem. Obviously, we'll never be able to fully diagnose it. It might be issues that are outside of their interactions with Khan Academy. But that's the type of thing that we, really, really, we want it to be kind of, going back to my previous career, kind of a, working at a hedge fund, I was like, how did people work at a hedge fund before Bloomberg terminals, where there's so much data and so much information? And my dream is in 10 years, teachers feel that way. It's like, wow, this is going to be the data that really allows me to arms me in a very actionable way.